What happens when pride meets reality? Richard Kessler, a hotel manager eager to impress a wealthy Chinese businessman, suddenly finds himself unprepared and close to humiliation. But an unexpected voice in fluent Mandarin is about to change everything. It all began at 7:42 in the morning. Richard was halfway through his second espresso when the hotel receptionist burst into his office, pale and nervous. "Mr. Kessler," she stammered, "he's coming. Today." Richard frowned. "Who's coming? Speak clearly." "The Chinese tycoon. The one looking at properties. He'll be here by noon." The words hit Richard like a punch. Noon, less than 4 hours away. He slammed his cup down so hard it rattled. "And you're just telling me now?" The receptionist explained that confirmation had only arrived at dawn. The visitor wanted to see everything: the presidential suite, the ballroom, the works. This was Richard's golden opportunity. If the billionaire liked what he saw, the hotel could land a deal that would impress investors for years. But there was one major problem. Richard didn't know a single word of Mandarin. He'd prepared for wealthy Americans, Europeans, even a Saudi prince who never showed. But never for China, even though Chinese tourism in California was booming. Now, with the clock ticking, he had no translator, no advisor, and no backup plan. Rising from his chair, Richard stormed into the hallway, barking orders. "Polish the ballroom. Check the chandeliers. Touch up the suite. And for God's sake, find me someone who can bridge this language gap." A concierge suggested calling the university for a student, but Richard snapped, "I need a professional, not a student. We can't afford embarrassment." The hotel bustled as usual. Guests ordering coffee, bellhops wheeling luggage, the smell of fresh pastries drifting through the lobby. But for Richard, every tick of the clock felt like doom. His career and reputation were on the line. Should he try hand gestures? Use a translation app? Nothing sounded right. Panic squeezed his chest tighter with each passing minute. That's when he noticed her. Across the lobby, polishing brass rails by the staircase, was one of the maids. Richard barely registered her most days, just another uniformed figure blending into the background. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet woman would soon become the key to saving his reputation. At 44, Richard carried himself like a man obsessed with appearances. Tailored suits from Los Angeles, Italian shoes, perfectly combed hair. To guests, he looked confident and in control. But behind closed doors, he fought a constant fear of failure. His journey had started far from luxury hotels. Born in Bakersfield, raised by a mechanic father and a diner waitress mother, Richard had scrubbed motel bathrooms in his 20s. Determined never to stay invisible, he taught himself to climb the ladder, smile wide, shake hands firmly, and fake confidence when needed. That strategy finally made him general manager of the Kessler Grand Hotel in Sacramento. But the truth was, the hotel was struggling. Occupancy was slipping. Competition was fierce. Investors demanded results. For Richard, the arrival of this international billionaire wasn't just a visit, it was survival. The trouble was Richard's pride. He hated asking for help. To him, hiring a translator earlier would have felt like weakness. Now, that choice was coming back to haunt him. By mid-morning, his desk was covered in papers and phone numbers. He called interpreter agencies, corporate contacts, even an old acquaintance who once studied in Shanghai. No one was available on such short notice. His assistant interrupted with updates. The suite was ready, the chandeliers fixed, the kitchen preparing tastings. Richard barely listened. His mind was locked on the clock. "This has to go perfectly," he muttered. "If I fail, we're finished." The assistant suggested letting the tycoon bring his own translator. Richard refused. "Absolutely not. We must look flawless from valet to wine list. We can't depend on outsiders." But deep down, fear gnawed at him. He had spent his life trying to prove he wasn't just a small-town kid from Bakersfield. And now, a single meeting threatened to expose every insecurity he'd buried. By 9:15 a.m., word of the high-stakes visit had spread through the hotel. Everyone knew this was more than a routine inspection. It was a test that could define Richard's future. By mid-morning, word of the special guest had spread through the hotel like fire. Bellhops whispered near the luggage carts, receptionists straightened their ties, and housekeepers worked at double speed. The Kessler Grand, usually calm and routine, now felt like it was preparing for opening night. At 9:27 a.m., the official email landed in Richard's inbox. It was short and formal, from the assistant of the guest. Mr. Chen will arrive at 12 p.m. He wishes to see the presidential suite, ballroom, kitchen, and staff accommodations. He values discretion. Please be punctual. Richard read it 3 times, his heart pounding harder with each line. The name was finally clear: Chen Jihao, a billionaire known worldwide as a real estate mogul, tech investor, and philanthropist. This was a man whose decisions moved millions. And now, he was walking into Richard's hotel. Richard rushed into the operations office. "Listen up," he barked. "This isn't just another guest. This man could buy 3 hotels like ours before lunch. I want this place spotless, the suite shining, the ballroom polished, the kitchen ready with world-class samples. No excuses." The staff scattered. Even the veterans, people who had seen political entourages and celebrity galas, felt the weight of his words. By 10 a.m., the hotel buzzed like a hive. Maintenance dusted vents nobody had touched in months. Florists arrived with orchids and lilies. Valets polished luxury cars outside. The hotel was transforming in real time. But one problem refused to go away: language. Richard stood at the reception desk, looking over the glittering chandeliers and perfectly dressed staff. Everything looked flawless, except his ability to communicate. He rehearsed greetings in his head. "Welcome to the Kessler Grand. We are honored by your presence." Every attempt felt clumsy and weak. He imagined Chen Jihao watching him stumble, unimpressed. His palms grew damp. A concierge approached timidly. "Sir, should we prepare gift baskets for his suite? Imported wines, maybe?" "Do it," Richard said sharply. Thoughtful, not desperate. He straightened his tie, catching his reflection in the elevator doors. For years, he had told himself success came from control. Working harder, looking sharper, demanding more. But this time was different. He couldn't fake Mandarin. He couldn't bluff cultural respect. He checked his watch. 2 hours and 30 minutes left. And somewhere, rolling a cart of linens down the hall, the one person who could solve his problem walked by unnoticed. By 10:30, the pressure reached its peak. The kitchen clattered with pans, chefs bickering over menus. Housekeepers rushed with baskets of linens. Parking attendants checked uniforms twice. The entire hotel felt like it was preparing for an earthquake. Richard stormed through the ballroom like a general. "That rug, straighten it. Those curtains, have they been steamed? Then why are you standing here? Move." His tone made a young busboy nearly drop a tray of glasses. Upstairs, the suite was in chaos. Pillows were being fluffed, curtains adjusted, the minibar checked twice. Richard snapped at a housekeeper for a wrinkle in the bedspread. "Fix it now," he muttered, pacing. His senior assistant, Janine, tried to calm him. "Richard, you're going to give yourself a stroke. The hotel looks incredible. Everything's under control." "Under control?" he hissed. "Do you think any of this matters if I can't even speak to the man? If he leaves unimpressed, our investors walk away." "We're finished," she offered. "Let him bring his own interpreter. Just focus on the tour." Richard shook his head. "No. That makes us look second-rate. If we can't even handle communication, why would he trust us with anything else?" By 11 a.m., the hotel was spotless. Guests were steered away from Chen's path. Security lingered by the entrances. Staff lined up in perfect rows, waiting. But Richard felt no relief. He ducked into his office, gripping the desk with sweaty hands. His reflection in the glass showed a man who built his life on control, now powerless against the one flaw he couldn't polish away. He whispered under his breath, "Please, let this work. Just let me hold it together." And in the hallway, unseen, housekeeper Marcia Bennett pushed her cart past his door. Quiet. Steady. Invisible. She had heard the whispers about the guest. She had no idea she was the lifeline Richard desperately needed. While the hotel scrambled in panic, Marcia Bennett went about her shift as usual. She started at 6 a.m., pushing her cart through quiet hallways, replacing towels and polishing brass. At 41, she was no stranger to long hours. Nearly 20 years in hospitality had taught her to work hard without expecting recognition. She lived in West Sacramento with her teenage son, Deshaun. Every paycheck went toward bills and saving for his college. Marcia didn't mind staying in the background. She preferred it that way. Most people barely noticed her, including Richard, who often passed her in the hall without a word. But what no one at the Kessler Grand knew was that Marcia carried a hidden skill. Years earlier, in community college, she had befriended international students from China. She helped them with English, and in return, they taught her Mandarin. What began as curiosity turned into real fluency after years of practice, tutoring, and cultural center work. She never talked about it. Why would she? Everyone assumed she was just a maid, and she let them. That morning, as she worked in the lobby, she overheard the whispers, "The billionaire's coming. He only speaks Mandarin. Richard's panicking." She could have spoken up, but didn't. Nobody had asked, and she resented the idea of being useful only when convenient. Still, when she saw Richard storming through the halls, barking orders, she felt a mix of pity and frustration. He looked like a man seconds away from breaking. Later, as she folded napkins beside her coworker Angela, the gossip continued. "You hear about this guy?" Angela asked. "Yeah," Marcia replied calmly. "They say he's a billionaire. Richard's running around like crazy." Angela laughed, while Marcia just smiled faintly. She kept her secret to herself, though she knew she could speak to this guest more easily than anyone else in the building. By noon, it was decision time. A black SUV pulled up, and the hotel froze. Richard stood stiffly at the entrance, palms damp, tie perfect. Out stepped Chen Jihao, smaller than Richard expected, but commanding in presence. He wore a sharp suit, polished shoes, and carried himself with quiet authority. Two assistants followed, leather folders in hand, scanning everything around them. Richard forced a smile. "Welcome to the Kessler Grand, Mr. Chen," he said slowly, hoping careful pronunciation would hide his nerves. Chen's expression didn't change. He leaned toward his assistant, who whispered in Mandarin before translating into English. "Mr. Chen thanks you for the welcome." Richard nodded and began pointing out chandeliers, marble floors, and flowers. But every exchange went through the assistant, slowing the conversation and making the tour feel awkward. Richard's stomach tightened with each pause. Nearby, polishing a table, Marcia happened to be within earshot. She hadn't planned to be there, but as she watched Richard stumble through the translator, she saw the guest's faintly unimpressed look. She could see this was going downhill. In the ballroom, Richard gestured proudly. "This space can hold 400 guests, perfect for conferences or galas." The translator repeated. Chen answered quickly in Mandarin. His assistant hesitated, then said, "He says, maybe it looks average." The word average hit Richard like a blow. His jaw clenched. This deal was slipping away. And that's when Marcia stepped forward. She cleared her throat and spoke in crisp Mandarin. "Dama Jiao Bujia." The room went silent. Every head turned. Chen's eyebrows lifted in surprise. For the first time, his face softened. He replied directly to Marcia, curious, engaged. She answered smoothly, her tone respectful and confident. What followed was a natural back-and-forth conversation, fluid, warm, effortless. The billionaire chuckled softly, showing the first real smile since his arrival. Richard stood frozen, mouth open, as his invisible maid translated with ease, adding polite touches of her own. Chen gestured for Marcia to walk beside him toward the suite upstairs, clearly impressed. His assistants exchanged whispers, one even jotting notes. Richard trailed behind, caught between humiliation and relief. For the first time that day, the balance of power had shifted, and it wasn't in his hands. She wasn't just translating words, she was fixing the very problem Richard had feared all morning. And in that moment, he finally saw the truth. The woman he ignored every single day had just saved him from total embarrassment. But being rescued doesn't come without a cost. Richard was about to feel what it meant to be humbled in front of everyone. From that point on, Richard was no longer leading the tour. Marcia was. Chen stayed close to her side, listening carefully as she explained each detail with confidence. In the presidential suite, she pointed to the river view and spoke in flawless Mandarin, describing how perfect it was for enjoying morning tea. Chen smiled for the first time that day. Richard trailed in the background, pointing out amenities no one seemed interested in. Each time he spoke, Marcia followed with her own thoughtful explanation, adding cultural context that Richard never even considered. She wasn't just translating, she was making the hotel feel welcoming and familiar to Chen. One of Chen's assistants leaned toward him and whispered, "She's fluent." Chen nodded, clearly impressed. Richard didn't need to understand the words. The admiration was obvious. Every compliment directed at Marcia chipped away at Richard's pride. This was supposed to be his moment, but now the spotlight was hers. When they entered the ballroom, Chen asked a detailed question in Mandarin while looking at the chandeliers. Richard froze, waiting for Marcia. She translated calmly, "He wants to know if the kitchen can prepare a traditional Chinese banquet." Richard quickly answered yes, but Marcia went further. She reassured Chen in Mandarin that the hotel respected cultural traditions and could even bring in special ingredients if needed. Chen's approval was clear. Richard's chest tightened. For years, he believed leadership meant control, that employees like Marcia were just background workers. But here she was, not just helping him, but carrying him. And everyone knew it. When the tour ended, Chen shook Richard's hand politely. But then he turned to Marcia, bowed slightly, and spoke warmly. Marcia translated, "He says he appreciates the hospitality, but most of all, he values being spoken to with respect in his own language." The words hit Richard hard. He forced a smile as Chen left, but inside he felt something he hadn't in years: shame. Shame for overlooking someone so important, shame for almost losing everything, and shame for not showing basic respect. The lobby slowly returned to normal. Staff went back to work, still whispering about what they'd seen. For once, Richard didn't bark orders. He just stood quietly, lost in thought. As Marcia wheeled her cart back to the service hallway, Richard finally called out, "Marcia!" She stopped, surprised. He had never spoken her name before. "You saved us today," he admitted. Marcia shrugged. "I just did what needed to be done." "No," Richard said firmly. "You did more than that. You gave him respect, something I couldn't give, no matter how polished I tried to look." There was a long pause. Richard shifted uncomfortably. "I should have known. I should have seen you. I'm sorry." Marcia studied him. She wasn't the type to cling to apologies. Life had taught her to keep moving. But his voice sounded genuine. She nodded softly. "Just remember this. People aren't invisible. Whether they scrub floors or sign checks, you never know what they bring with them." Her words sank deep. Richard realized this wasn't about Mandarin, or even about Chen Jihao. It was about respect, truly seeing people, not just their job titles. The next day, Richard did something nobody expected. He gathered the staff in the ballroom, not to criticize, but to thank them. "I owe all of you my gratitude," he said. "And I owe Marcia even more. She showed me what leadership really is. It's not about control or appearances. It's about respect, listening, and recognizing the people around you." Some staff looked shocked. Others smiled. For the first time in years, Richard felt lighter. Marcia didn't want the spotlight, but she accepted the moment gracefully. Not for herself, but because she knew her son would be proud. Life at the Kessler Grand continued, but something had changed. Richard learned names, asked questions, and even downloaded a Mandarin app to start with the basics. One moment of humility had changed him more than years of ambition ever had. And maybe that's the lesson. You never know who holds the key to your next breakthrough. It might not be the boss in the corner office. It could be the person you walk past every day without noticing. Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. So ask yourself, who are you overlooking right now?